India has essentially been a cash economy. 86% of our transactions are in cash, and about 95% of our personal expenses are also in cash. But India spends about 1.7% of its GDP on cash just to print it, and about $3.5 billion are spent each year on circulating the cash around us. So now the question is that can India go cashless? Or more importantly, for a developing nation like us, would it even be a step in the right direction or will it just be counterproductive? Hello and welcome to the next episode of Converse with Commerce. I am Gurbani and I'll be your host for today. To talk about this very cash non-cash dilemma, we have here with us Mr. Kailash Gupta, who is the Senior Vice President and Head of Payment Solutions and Cross-Border Money Transfer at Thomas Cook Ltd. He is a payment professional with an experience of over 16 years with an overall helpful demeanor. Mr. Gupta is someone who is well informed at all times and believes in spreading the knowledge to all those around him. Hello, sir, and thank you so much for tuning in. It's an honor to have you here today. Myself and my team has prepared a few questions that we'd like your insight on. By now, you all
Sure.
would know that. Thank you, sir. By now, you all would know that our topic revolves around cashless economy. So I would request you to give our audience a clearer idea about the concept. I mean, you could start by telling us what exactly is a cashless economy.
Sure. So, like the word says, firstly, thank you for inviting me over. It's a pleasure to be here. Like the word says, cashless largely means an economy where physical cash, and which basically means banknotes and coins, do not exist and they're not used as mediums to execute a commerce transaction. By commerce, I mean an exchange of value being undertaken. Right. So that is what truly a cashless economy in theory means. That said, I don't think globally at any country in the world exists which is truly 100% cashless. What economies drive to is to create a mechanism where the adoption of digital payments as against cash increases and the usage of cash goes down. And that is what the aim for any economy is to drive towards becoming cashless.
So a cashless economy, it would be called a cashless economy where the majority of the payments are made without
Correct.
cash and all the payments.
Correct. So if globally you look at developed economies as against those developing, and probably, India might be a bad example because we've got a very progressive regulator, but largely if you look at economies like the US, certain geographies in Europe, South Asia, which are typically marked as developed nations, as against those which are developing, what you will see is the usage of digital payments in those economies is relatively higher than those in developing nations or third world nations typically.
So, no cash would be used for paying the street vendors or the rickshaw drivers, or the casual,
Correct.
this. Okay.
So yeah, typically that's what happens. So as economies mature, what you see is that people tend to use digital payments or digital methods of payments for more day-to-day usage, right? And that's what the difference is. So typically, if you're traveling through the US, what you will see is, right from your taxis to or Singapore as an example, right, which is a very, very well-developed digital payment accepting infrastructure. Any public transport accepts a carriage, accepts a card or a digital payment method. In fact, cash is to some extent frowned upon. Be it a taxi that you're taking or entering a bus, everywhere you either swipe their internal smart cards or the transit cards that they have, or you can use your debit or credit cards to make
Now
payment.
we also have Uber, Ola, all of that. So
Correct. So even your regular taxis there are very, a typical taxi in Singapore would have at least 2 or 3 machines. They typically accept any form of cash or wallets, and that's how it operates. Any bus that you walk into, you can just tap your card and go in, and you don't need to really draw out cash. In fact, I don't think cash is allowed in buses in Singapore. You can't pay through
So
cash if
think
I'm not
about that
mistaken.
right now. Like here, it seems like a whole new world, But anyway, so the next question is, what would be the upsides of such an economy?
So clearly, what it does is it does away with the one and very critically is the entire hassles of carrying cash, right? And cash carrying typical case where he's getting money transmitted directly to his bank account. He doesn't need to bother about going and depositing the cash into a bank account at the end of the day. Money is credited. He can just swipe his card to refuel his car. His EMI gets transferred directly from his bank account, and the entire ecosystem is managed seamlessly without him having to, probably in the older days, go queue up, waste half a day in queuing up at a bank branch and depositing that cash, or going and making a payment for his EMI. Right, so it does away with those hassles. The third part of it is the entire accounting, etc., becomes very seamless. So if you're a small business and all your payments are digitally coming through, there are integrations and softwares now which can automate your accounting processes, accounting your books, etc. So everything gets automated. Your entire typically the old ledger system goes out of the window, and you can technically just pull out a flat file or an Excel file from your payment gateway, and your accounting is done. From a regulatory perspective and from an economy perspective, what it does is it does away with the entire issue of black money, right? Which is the tax evasion, etc. Because everything is being transacted through a regulated channel. There is track of the money. It's coming through all the taxation, or the taxes are being paid at every stage, which is applicable. So overall, at an economy level, it tremendously helps the country develop. And that's why the thrust in digital payments across the world.
Hearing all of this, it definitely seems like the perfect option, but I'm sure it would have a few downsides too. So,
So
the
one, sure. So the advantage, like I said, is it does away with the black money. The downside of that is again that it does away with black money, right? So the people who
okay,
probably do not want to
yeah.
transact, do not want to pay taxes, are really not the ones who will want to accept digital
So
payments
it
and
is in
such.
the favor of like the economy. Basically, it
Correct,
might be a
correct,
problem to the few
definitely,
people, but it is in the favor of the
correct,
economy. Okay.
definitely. So it does
Um.
help because it gathers taxes, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, what are the alternatives that are being used for cash other than like credit cards and debit cards, and what could be potentially used in the future?
So plastic and debit credit cards are basically called plastic based payment methods,
Yeah.
and these are what traditionally have been in existence right from 1960s odd, when diners first launched a credit card in the US. Over the last 8 to 10 years, what you've seen is a lot of changes in the way payments are made, where the physical form factor, the physical card, is not required anymore. So what you had was the emergence of wallets like Paytm, where actually a mobile device could be used to make a payment. Then you had things
Yeah.
like QR code or Bharat QR, etc. If you remember, which was launched, I think,
Yeah.
around demonetization. They could just scan your phone and make a payment to a merchant. You've got UPI, which basically allows you to make P2P or person-to-person payments seamlessly and instantaneously. For banking transfers, there's NEFT, RTGS, and things like that. Very soon, and these are things that are actually existing today, you could probably make payments through your ring, through your wristbands, probably by scanning your face or things like that. So basically, it'll be just be you waving your hand and probably making a payment at some point in time.
That seems very interesting. But now that you mentioned demonetization, I was actually meaning to ask you what has been demonetization's impact on it. Like you were already transitioning into a cashless economy, right? So, what was demonetization's impact?
So let me break that into two parts, right? So the basic aim of demonetization, and the verdicts out there, right? No one knows what is right, what is wrong, what happened on this. But the basic aim of demonetization was to kill the cash floating in the economy. So there were certain predictions around in terms of how much is the physical cash floating, and the aim behind demonetization was to bring that within the regulated channel. From what there are certain reports published that it did not fulfill that aim, because the cash in circulation, as per RBI reports, continues to be the same approximately a year after what it was pre-demonetization. So the verdict's out there on that in terms of whether it addressed the primary concern of doing away with black money or the cash in circulation. But what it did was, and gave a big thrust to the economy, was in terms of digital payments. So, pre-demonetization, I don't think your vegetable vendor or your local fruit guy understood what scanning
ATM
and
and
paying
everything,
through a
yeah.
Paytm was. And I think
Yeah.
everyone across the country now understands that. You go buy vegetables, you can pay through your mobile. And I think that's the biggest change it brought about in the economy, where people understood what digital payments were.
Yeah. Yeah, even in
And I
like
think
the
that's been
urban,
the biggest win.
still a lot of people in rural areas don't know about it, like a few things. But in urban areas
Correct.
also, I think there's enough awareness, but people still, it's a little lazy to like use it instead, they just think that if we pay
Correct.
cash, it's very easier. So I think they have to put it into use more, rather than just the theoretical knowledge. But okay, so now since India is a developing nation, obviously, so what do you think are the hurdles faced by any developing nation to, transition into a cashless economy, other than obviously the awareness?
So there are a couple of things, right? When you try to create a digital payment atmosphere or an ecosystem, there is a lot of investment that needs to be made because it requires both digitization of the way you pay as well as digitization of the way you accept digital payments, right?
Yeah.
So physical machines, QR codes, enabling merchants. Thanks to Geo, at least we've now got the internet speeds which allow seamless and fast transactions to take place. So there's a lot of investment that needs to happen around the physical infrastructure side of it. Very recently, if you must have seen, Axis Bank, I think, if I'm not mistaken, launched a new technology wherein any merchant could start accepting payments through their mobile phones. So basically, it's called a smart POS, where you download their application and your mobile phone turns into a physical card accepting device. So we can transact through that. So a lot of this investment is what needs to go into an economy. That's one. Secondly, which a lot of people don't understand, is that an entire digital payment has a cost of transaction, right? So there is a cost of issuing a card, doing that transaction for a bank of the instrument uh, whose card is being used, as well as the merchant where the digital payment is used. So when a merchant accepts a transaction on a card, instead of 100, he probably gets only 98 or 99 rupees, and that's how the system operates, and that's what keeps the ecosystem alive. So these are the two key investments that need to go, obviously, besides the training and the people acceptance side of it.
Yeah, even I didn't think about all of that before. But okay, what about those people? Like all of this requires a smartphone and an internet connection, right? So what about those people who don't have an access? In India, there's a large part of the population who still does not use smartphones or anything. So what about them then?
Correct. So if you look at it, India is fairly well advanced in terms of smartphone and telephony penetration. In fact, the internet penetration in India is one of the fastest growing, and we now have data speeds comparable to some of the top 10 or 15 countries across the world in terms of the download speeds that we get. If you look at Africa as an example, for that matter, what did happen was Africa did not, because of the widespread that it had about 5 to 7 years ago, early mid 2000s, it was physically impossible to create a physical acceptance infrastructure. So what you had is companies, telephone companies or telephone operators, mobile telephony operators like Vodafone, etc. What they did was they enabled mobile wallets, similar to what Paytm has, but in that case, it was done by the mobile operators, and which created a massive jump in the digital payments that happened in that economy. So if you look at India also, what has happened is it's not that we don't have the reach, it's more about education. So if you look at
Yeah.
Geo, for example, right, the kind of reach that they have in terms of the mobile penetration or the number of connections they have is massive. They'll cover, my guess is, between the operators about 60 to 70% of the population easy, right?
Wow.
Most of their devices are equipped, and if you look at the entire Geo model through their app, is to create an entire ecosystem which allows everything, right? So you can accept payments. It's going to be a mini bank. It's going to be a mini mart. It's going to be a mini digital theater and everything around that. So I think it's not about the infrastructure or the penetration really that's what the problem. But for us, it's about the education of the people and the cost of the transaction, which is the concern really. So as and when people get educated about it, I think we have the physical reach to enable them, either through a smartphone or something similar.
Okay, so thank you so much for answering that. The next question is that the recent economic trends obviously are showing that our country is transitioning into a cashless economy. So, moving towards a cashless system, obviously the government also has had a like obviously its government has a huge real role to play in it. So, what do you think the government has done for it, like till now?
Right. So the government's been the main driver for adoption of digital payments in India, right? And they've been recognized globally as one of the most progressive regulators, and it's been recognized as some of the technologies that they've brought to the market are considered the best in the world. In fact, they are being adopted globally as we speak. And I think the RBI, Niti Aayog have played a massive role in creating the digital acceptance ecosystem. And UPI, I think, is the best example you can look at it. A billion transactions, the amount of throughput that's going through it surpassed every target that the government envisaged for digital payments. The second thing that they've done, and something again not very well known, is that they did something called zero MDR, where they said merchants would not pay for accepting transactions or would not have to pay for accepting digital transactions. What that allowed was for a lot of small merchants to actually come into the digital payment ecosystem because they didn't have that mind block that a massive an X amount or X percentage would be deducted from the money they're receiving. So I think
Yeah,
these things have really helped push through the digital adoption in the country.
yeah, right, absolutely. Okay, so going cashless would mean absolutely zero scope for bargain, right? The goods would have to be bought on MRP. So don't you think that would lead the producers and merchants in like unfair trade practices?
Not really. See, digital payments does not mean that the price that is published there is final. It basically is the final exchange of money. So you can still haggle with your vendor. Now, no one's stopping you from that. It's just that when you all decided on a final price of say 100 rupees, instead of giving him a 100 rupee physical note, you do it through a mobile device or through your card. That's what it is. So it doesn't really stop you from negotiating or doing a price negotiation around that.
Mhm. Just I'm just curious, but has your company ever been defrauded owing to like cashless transactions? I mean, you don't have to answer that if it's
So
something, but
nothing. So obviously, there's nothing that we've seen as such internally with the company. Unfortunately, I can't really quote on that in detail.
yeah,
But digital, wherever there is a digital payment that happens, obviously there is the scope for frauds to happen, right? It's bound
yeah,
to happen. There are fraudsters who will try to scam the system. But I think there are enough technologies available now and enough mandates which the regulator has bought through, which ensure the consumer is protected. To just give you an example, PIN at POS. Whenever you use your card at a merchant, you're supposed to enter your PIN. Similarly, when you're doing an online transaction, there's a second factor authentication or an OTP which comes to you
yeah,
through
yeah,
which you're
yeah.
supposed to transact. There are also regulations by the RBI which protects the consumer for an X amount of money when a fraud happens, as long as the consumer reports it within a certain point of time. So I think a
Right.
lot of these mechanisms create a seamless environment where the consumer rights and his money are protected at all points in time. That said, obviously the risk stays. Issuers or the people who enable these payment systems keep investing a lot in methods to detect frauds, stop frauds, be it real-time monitoring softwares to analytics to artificial intelligence, which actually monitors transactions real times and decides whether they're fraudulent or not, to things like that. There's a massive technology arm that works at the back.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So what is our role? Like, what would be a civilian's role in this process of, like transition?
So, of course, from a civilian's perspective, what I would say is just be open to trying these technologies. And I've tried this.
Absolutely.
To quote an example, with my parents who are senior citizens upwards of 70. I think the biggest problem for them was to
They don't
break
want to
that
try
mental.
anything.
The
Yeah.
first time, yes. So once I got him to try, my father, for example, once I got him to try internet banking, the first time obviously was a nightmare. But after that, it's been a nightmare for me because everything's on internet banking and I need to sit with him to do it. Right?
Yeah.
So he
Yeah.
doesn't
That's
want to
how
go
my
to a
dad
bank
said it to
branch.
become. Yeah. Okay.
So every morning he'll come to me and say, "Log in. I need to make this payment." That's great.
Yeah, yeah. So basically, all citizens just need to start accepting the new
Correct.
technology, like using it.
Correct. This is the first
Um, uh,
experience that matters.
yeah, true. Because obviously it is easier and they'll see it once they use it.
True.
It's just.
True.
When I was researching, I came across this line that said that Aadhaar card can be the cornerstone of government's vision to a cashless economy. So, like, could you explain that a little? Like, how can Aadhaar card be? Uh,
So step back 3 years ago, 4 years ago, or about a decade when Aadhaar actually started. So 2000, 2011 is, I think, when it started picking up steam. The objective behind that product, behind Aadhaar, was to create a single identity product, and the entire mechanism around that was through biometrics, which are unique to a person. It becomes the identifier which can allow that person to do any kind of authentication, be it an identity authentication or a transaction authentication or a validation and things like that. The problem has been, I think, and there were things like Aadhaar Pay, etc., enabled, where through your Aadhaar card linked to a bank account, you could actually make a payment without needing to have a card or any banking product like a debit card or a credit card with you. While it was one of the best methods in terms of a single identity product that could have been used across the country, and with the kind of penetration that actually achieved, it would have been great in terms of the access it would have provided. Unfortunately, there are certain issues that came around the data privacy and the identity theft aspects of it, and I think the Supreme Court ruled around certain restrictions around how it can be operated. I think which to a large extent limited its use, and I think that's where it got stuck. But some of the technologies that were built around Aadhaar and the India stack, I think, were great in terms of creating a seamless payment experience or a digital ecosystem. Unfortunately, I think it's some time away from further adoption and growth as we see today.
Now, like, Aadhaar is like done. We can't really.
No, so Aadhaar is still there. It's still an accepted document.
Yeah, that I
It's
know.
just that the use cases are restricted because it's not, let me put it this way, not mandatory to be used. There are
Yeah.
multiple options that can be done. So you could use any document besides Aadhaar. Earlier, Aadhaar was the primary document for a lot of transactions, identity, etc.
Yeah. Now, the more you tell me about all of this, the more interesting it gets. Anyways, but do you think if India adopts like a cashless economy, if it finally is able to attain the goal, so will we be called as a modern India?
So I see. Cashless is one part of modernization of a country, right? So it's a major step because it helps develop a lot of things and modernize a lot of things. But I think it's one of the spokes in the wheel which would need to be done. There are a lot of other things like education, of
Yeah.
infrastructure, etc., which will need to build up. But I think,
Poverty reduction.
yeah,
Important.
exactly. Cashless ecosystem would be one of the main spokes in the wheel as well, but it is a key requirement, not the only requirement, is what I would say.
Yeah, great, definitely. Okay, so lastly, I'd like to ask you that in your opinion, would you consider a cash-free economy a boon or a bane? And do you think India is ready for it right now? Like, bring India?
So, asking a payment professional that question, obviously the answer is just one. Of course, it's a boon.
I think that's what we want to
And right, and I think India has been ready for it for a while, and I think the growth numbers that we see in terms of digital payments are a testimony to the kind of adoption that is actually happening in the country. For a lot of digital payments, and when you look at conferences across the world and news articles that are coming out in the media, more often than not, India is one of the first few countries to be quoted, one of the first few technologies from India, what they talk about. And there are countries across the globe which are adopting things that we're doing on digital payments here. So definitely, India is well on its way towards a digital a much better adoption of digital payments.
Yeah, that's really nice to hear. Okay, with this we come to an end of our session. Thank you so much, sir. It was a pleasure to talk to you. I mean, the information that you put out will definitely, help all of us have a better understanding of the economy right now. I would also like to thank Manisha, ma'am, who gave us this opportunity in the first place, and all my teammates who helped me with the research. But most importantly, again, thank you, sir. Is there any piece of information that you would like to leave our audience with?
No, it's been a pleasure being here. Thank you so much. All I would like to say is use digital payments. You don't need cash, especially in today's era with the entire fear around COVID. I think do not touch cash. Use the card
Yeah,
instead. Tap and go is the way
definitely.
to do.
I saw my mom once she was actually washing the notes, so it's and then drying it.
That
So
happens, yeah. That does happen.
yeah,
Ironing to washing, I've seen it all.
yeah.
Great.
Okay. So thank you,
Thanks so
sir.
much.
Thank you again,
Pleasure.
and thanks for our audience, whoever for tuning in. Thank you.
Thank you.